Today on the Illini Inquirer podcast, Mike LaTulip joins me to talk about a very, very good week for Illinois basketball. That's after we talked about a very bad week the week prior, but this one was much better as Illinois beats Iowa by 20 points and then goes on the road and beats number 15 Michigan by 20 points. We dive really deep into that victory. Kylan, Boswell, Trey White really coming on late in the season. The defense has some bite. What does Mike like about this team right now? What's he think about the matchup against Purdue in the regular season finale on Friday night? And what's he think about this team's capabilities once it gets in the postseason, if it's able to string some of these games together? But before we get to Mike, I want to break down two pieces of news, big pieces of news on this Tuesday for Illinois football. The first, again, another big commitment in state. Casey Thomann out of Olney, plays for Richland County. Small school, but big-time prospect. Casey, a top 20 prospect in the state of Illinois. According to the composite rankings, he's number 12 prospect. According to the 24/7 sports rankings, he's the number 19 prospect. Regardless, he is a rare offensive tackle prospect because he's 6'7", over 300 pounds, but he doesn't look like he's 300 pounds because he moves extremely well. But boy, he's a big time, high ceiling prospect. Chose Illinois over several other Power Four offers, including Big Ten rivals, Iowa, Nebraska, Northwestern. The other schools I've gotten in here were West Virginia, Iowa State was very involved as well. So another very good in-state win for Illinois. And again, like what is great about Casey Thomann, he's been playing football for 3 years. So he started his freshman year. Comes from a basketball family, is really focused on basketball until high school, but he's really improved a lot the last couple of years. He plays with a lot of physicality, both on the basketball court and the football field, but he's just got a huge ceiling because it's hard to find true offensive tackle prospects, and he is. Great length, great athleticism, moves extremely well, and then he plays extremely physical. So he comes from a smaller school, and all offensive linemen usually are going to need some time to develop and to learn technique and to learn how they have to block at the next level. But the ceiling here is really, really high, and to win that kind of Big Ten battle is big. But it's the kind of process you want Illinois to follow, right? It's so strong here. They were the first to offer. It started with Pat Ryan, a name we bring up so often, the director of Illinois high school relations for the Illini, gets some film from Luke Carmody, the Richland County coach, and he loves it right away, passes on to the staff, and they get Casey on campus immediately and then often. Casey visited here, and we joked about the last time I caught up with Casey. He's been here at least 10 times. I bet it's a dozen, and he just kept showing up to campus, I always say follow the visits, especially when a guy's visiting 5+ times, and especially when a guy is visiting 10+ times. So for me, he did visit elsewhere, but kept coming back and back to Illinois. I know it's only 2 hours away, but that's still a time investment. And Brett Bielema, Bart Miller did a really good job in this recruitment. So they land another really good prospect in the class of 2026 and now have 10 commitments in the class of 2026. Now the number 5 class in the country. It is very early. There will be powerhouses that will pass up Illinois, but the Illini continue to land really good players, top 500 prospects, top 600. Maybe it ends up top 700. They get a 4-star in Victor Singleton, who's a top 100 prospect. And it's a great start to this class, and they've set such a high floor for what this class could be. And to be honest with you, it's March 4th, and they're about halfway done with this class, with a bunch of huge visits coming up. And they got a chance at a lot of other great prospects here coming up. You got official visits, unofficial visits coming up over the next couple months. And there's a really solid start in state when you can get Davon Grant, you can get Jacob Alexander and get Casey Thomann. 3 guys are in the top 20, 3 guys in 20, I think by the composite rankings are in the top 15 in state, getting those quality prospects in state and beating Big Ten programs for them. And now you're shooting higher. J.C. Anderson's going to be on campus 2 times in the next month. 4-star tight end at Mount Zion. Nasir Rankings taking his official visit to Illinois. His first official visit will be in Champaign. Jacob Eberhardt, he's in the St. Louis area, but he's an Illinois legacy. He's taking an official visit in early April, and he's a high 3-star prospect. Messiah Tilson out of Rockford Guilford. He's a top 10 prospect in the state. Nick Hankins out of Belleville. These are really high-level prospects that Illinois is getting on campus and now has a chance to try and close on. And it's a lot easier to do that when you have buy-in from prospects like Casey Thomann, like Victor Singleton, Cam Thomas, some of the guys they've gotten on board early in this class. So just a great start to this class 2026. Now look at this offensive line. You have Landon Von Segern, 3-star interior offensive lineman out of Nebraska. And now you had Thomann, a no doubt tackle prospect. Now you can go to some of your other offensive line targets. Owen Fours from Barrington, Gene Reardon out of Hinsdale, and Kai Pritchard out of New Jersey, a 4-star prospect who's going to take an official visit to Illinois at some point. The game of musical chairs, the chairs are starting to wind down. So if you want to jump on board at Illinois, you got to kind of do it soon here if you're one of those prospects and you really, really like Illinois. So creating some scarcity with those scholarships can work in your favor because, again, make these prospects maybe a little bit more urgent in their process. The other thing I want to bring up, Art Sitkowski promoted a co-quarterbacks coach. Kind of thought this would happen, but it makes all those sense in the world that it actually is happening. This is a promotion for Art. He was the assistant quarterbacks coach this year. He's the co-quarterbacks coach now. Does that change a lot of what he does? Probably not. He's still going to be on the road recruiting. He coached a lot of the quarterbacks in their drills and in the quarterback room. He's still going to do some of those things. But I think you empower him a little bit more moving forward. Art, just 24 years old, by the way. Most of all, you're retaining him. Keeping Art Sitkowski on board likely comes with a pay bump, right? Now you keep Art Sitkowski, who everyone you talk to thinks is a complete rising star in this business. So he's been a great recruiter for them. He helped recruit Trey Petty. He helped recruit Carson Boyd. He was key in getting Michael Clayton on board in the class of 2026. So he's got a great relationship with all those quarterbacks. You get to keep that in the program, and you get to keep just an incredibly bright, charismatic, and smart, and really just relationship builder in that quarterback room. And you get to keep him on the trail. He's done great work in New Jersey and in Florida. And if you're thinking long-term, which is what I am, Barry Olney Jr. very likely could be a head coaching candidate at an FBS program in the next year or two. His name got kind of floated around there a little bit this offseason, but if Illinois has another good offensive year, and I expect they will with the running game that they're returning, with the quarterback they're returning, the offensive line that they're returning, the wide receivers they are developing and adding, I think Barry Olney has a chance to be a head coach in the next year or two. And while Sitkowski will leap to an OC, I wouldn't project, right? Pretty young for that. And that's such an important position when you got a head coach like Brett Bielema, but he's a defensive coach. Brett can do everything, but that's a really important job to be the head coach of an offense. But can Art be your quarterback's coach? Can he have some stability? Can you have some stability in that room with Art Sitkowski? And given that he's recruited a lot of these guys, I think it's important to keep him long-term as a potential option to help grow in your program. And Brett Bielema, with this move, just like he did with Trent Harris at outside linebackers coach, he clearly thinks Art Sitkowski has a bright future. And he's got a pretty good eye for this. Brett said a lot of his former players become coaches for him with some really, really good success among those, including on this staff with Terrence Jamison, Aaron Henry, Harris, Sitkowski. You go up and down the line. A lot of former players that are now coaching for him. Art Sitkowski is one of those guys you want to keep. So this move made all the sense in the world for Illinois, and I'm happy to see it because Art Sitkowski is definitely a future star in this business, and he's been good for Illinois right now. All right, let's talk some Illinois basketball. Mike LaTulip joins us next right here on the Illini Inquirer podcast. Are you ready to optimize your nutrition this year? Well, Factor has chef-made gourmet meals that make eating well easy. They're dietitian approved and ready to heat and eat in 2 minutes so you can fuel right and feel great no matter what life throws at you. Factor arrives fresh and fully prepared, perfect for any active, busy lifestyle. And with over 40 options across 8 dietary preferences on the menu each week, it's easy to pick meals tailored to your goals. So you can choose from preferences like Calorie Smart, Keto, or my favorite, Protein Plus. And Factor also can help you feel your best all day long with wholesome smoothies, breakfast, grab-and-go snacks, and more add-ons. Reach your goals this year with ingredients you can trust and convenience that can't be beat. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/factorpodcast and use code FACTORPODCAST to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's code FACTORPODCAST at factormeals.com/factorpodcast to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. All right, it's Mike LaTulip time here on the Illini Inquirer podcast, and we do have better stuff to talk about this week because Illinois has two 20-point victories over the week, beat Iowa, a team that's struggling right now, but you kept them down. Then you go on the road to Michigan, one of the more impressive wins of the season. So, Mike, what stood out to you about beating the Wolverines 20 points at their place?
Super impressive win. I think not letting the circumstances of the game dictate the things that you can bring to every game. I think beginning of that game, you start over 5 from 3, you miss some bunnies. Like, it's probably very easy to slip into the, oh no, it's happening again type mindset, but that didn't impact your focus defensively. It didn't impact your physicality. It didn't impact your pursuit on the offensive glass. And, you know, I think that discipline on the defensive end and that pursuit on the offensive glass kept you in the game, so that in the second half, once you stopped turning the ball over, you allowed that margin on the glass to actually work for you. And of course, they made threes, but that rebounding margin was really, really important because I think it ended up really breaking Michigan's spirit, and you overpowered them physically. And I think there's a confidence that you can get from that. We've talked about that before, just man on man physicality, that when you're overpowering someone, that creeps into your psyche in a good way. And I think that's part of the reason, in my opinion, that shots started falling. I think guys just felt like more of a collective confidence than we had seen. We saw a little bit against Iowa, but certainly the most we had probably seen in the last few weeks.
Yeah, for me, Mike, it was a lot of intangible things that was most encouraging, right? It was just, there's a tenaciousness. There was a confidence, like they were the aggressor. It felt like it'd been a while since we'd seen that. So yeah, sure, you made shots, but you were winning even when you weren't making shots. And that's my question for this team is, when you're not making shots, can you compete? Can you have a chance to win? And they gave themselves a chance against Michigan. And then all of a sudden the shots go down and you see the ceiling of this team.
They've shown that they can win games missing shots because they do those other things. The games they've lost is when they're missing shots and not doing those other things.
Right.
So now when you put it together, and we've seen this, when they put it together and they're doing all those things and they're making shots, it's like, hold on, what do we got here? Because I just think, and it's, on Twitter, there's like a running joke of like, I came away more impressed with Illinois in this game. And
solo stuff.
Yeah. And there was a lot of that, but I think when you look at going into March, and everybody will tag certain teams as, I wouldn't want to play this team. Or if this team gets a 7 seed in the tournament, I wouldn't want to be the 2 seed. And I think there's validity to that with Illinois. Because I don't think it's a mistake that you saw the peaks that they've reached this season are things that like haven't been done before and haven't been done, in the last 15 years or whatever it is. I mean, you get 2 20-point wins against AP top 25 teams on the road, which has only been done 4 times in how long? Like 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get the win against Oregon by 32 points, which was the biggest road win against a top 10 team ever. Like that, you don't just accidentally do those things. And like, oh, just an average team doing stuff that's historic. Now we've seen the Valleys too, which is the largest loss in Illinois program history.
Mm-hmm.
But I just think if you're forecasting this Illinois team, you see, okay, well, there's been changes defensively. It's not like, oh, they're just making shots so they're better. There's been changes defensively. I think the Duke game allowed them to just really exhale a bit, probably after, and band them together. I mean, there's a real factor with that too. When you feel like maybe the fan base is against you a little bit, you've disappointed in some ways, and clearly the week of practice after that was huge for them. Not only did they implement other stuff, but just getting their bite back, getting their physicality back, because I thought that's what allowed them to run Michigan out of the gym in this game.
Yeah, Kylan told us and told me that like that Duke game could help them in the long run, because it really makes you sit there and think, Michael, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Are we just going to sit here? Yeah, are we going to sit here and lay down and season over or are we going to fight? And I feel like you in your career probably saw those two different things. But I think of the last Bruce Weber team. They just laid down, right? They just lost 12 of 14 games. There was a talented team that missed the NCAA tournament, and he gets fired after it. But then, the year prior, your first year here, like, start off terribly in the Big Ten after a good non-conference, but you find a way to fight back and get back to the tournament and make some noise there. So I guess, what do you look for in a team when they're facing that? Like, what do you have to see from Illinois? Like, what is the tell that they're going to come out and fight that game?
I think you can tell in the first 5 minutes just the disposition and the body language, right? I thought Kylan showed that right from the beginning. Trey White showed that right from the beginning. Those two guys were catalysts, getting them off to the start that they got in this game. And it really all started on the glass and on the defensive end. And so that's always, when there's a new game plan, when there's a new way you're defending, how in tune, how locked in are you to what's going on? And I think that's given them a jolt too, because it's just another thing they'll have to lock in on defensively instead of just like, well, we're dropping, we're going over, and it's, things become kind of mundane on the defensive end. So that's something I'm looking for too. But I think back to my freshman year where I think we started Big Ten play 2-7 before that Indiana game. And I mean, people were pretty much kind of writing us off before that Indiana game. I think we had lost to Wisconsin the game before. And then we played Indiana, who was the number one team in the country. And it's like, man, if we get this win, it can kind of reaffirm some things. Like, we can compete. We can play with the best. We can, when we bring the right things to the game, win at a high level. And I think we went on to win 5 straight. And so that can serve as kind of a rallying cry for the team where, you get a win against Iowa, but people were like, well, it's Iowa, they're struggling. They might not make the Big Ten tournament, but to then go and do it on the road like they did, that's just, it's one of the best feelings as a player. And it's one of the best feelings, I think, as a staff too, because you see that you're rewarded for staying the course. And I've said it for weeks now with this team that I did not question their level of care.
Yeah.
One bit. I didn't. I thought it was more get out of your own way type stuff, get out of your head type stuff, and start pouring yourself into the other guys more. And I think they've done that. They've shown that. And this can be the result.
What is the key to 19 offensive rebounds, 30 second chance points, especially with your big man against that Michigan front line only playing 18 minutes?
Yeah, I think, to me, I've always believed that rebounding is less about size and more about speed and angles, and just the consistency of how often you go to the glass. And Illinois was sending 5 most of the game, and so you had no. If you're Michigan, you had no opportunity to just kind of exhale and be like, well, this guy's out by the wing and he's probably going to get back like most teams do, where they send a safety valve back and crash 4. I mean, Illinois was saying, man, we're going to go crash 5 and you got to try to box us out. And the way they pursued angles, the way they, there was a rebound that Jake Davis had in the first half that I think maybe Tommy took the 3 or KJ took the 3, and Wolf looked at Davis, head up, went to go hit, and Davis, like, this is what, smart players, guys that have played a lot of basketball, you can see the trajectory. And Danny Wolf's going to box you out. He can't see it. So he knew the shot was going short. So when Danny went to box out, Jake was able to swim over towards the free throw line because that's where the ball was coming off. And they were just, the way they tracked the ball, I mean, that's part of it too, is being able to track the ball. Where's it going to go? And if you're the shooter, you need to give it a chance too. If it's going to be short, it's got to hit off the front of the rim and come up, not hit off the front of the rim and go down. The Gillespie shot for Maryland, that when Michigan State hit the half-court shot, any other miss, air ball, any other miss, Michigan State, that game probably goes into overtime, because it's the quick misses off the rim that come straight down, which usually come from tough shots and bad shots, that are the easiest for the defensive team to rebound, because it just drops right in their lap. But when you're taking good shots and rhythm shots, you give yourself more of a chance to get those. If they're misses, they're long misses. If they're short misses that are close enough to the rim where they pop up and go north. And the other thing too that I think Trey White in particular did really, really well is when he's crashing from the corner, and this has become more of a point of emphasis more than when I played, It was more like, hey, if you're in the corner, you probably want to start getting back. You're far away from the ball. But now they've done this, and the Celtics do it really well too with Drew Holiday, is when you're in the corner and you're crashing, you crash at an angle. You crash like from the corner to the elbow because it almost has dual purpose, right? Mm-hmm. I'm kind of getting back. I'm not going beeline kind of underneath the basket. I'm kind of getting back, but I'm also putting myself in the play to go and still get the offensive rebound when it comes off, and traded that, I thought, masterfully on multiple occasions. So there's certainly an art to it, but there's also just a consistency to it, a focus around it where I may be tired. I still got to go. I still got to crash. Just put enough pressure on these guys to have to look for you every time. And I thought it kind of got Michigan off kiltered, and certainly it was one of those games where it felt like the ball was bouncing directly where you were going, but I'll give them credit too, because you got to track it.
This feels like, I mean, you mentioned, the defensive bite, the changes they have made. It certainly feels like it has given Kylan Boswell a lot of confidence, a lot more bite to what he brings. And it feels like that translates to the offensive side, but just they have disrupted teams the last two games, right? And these are two good offenses, or at least Iowa was a good offense. Michigan has had a lot of success this year. What's led to just finally feeling like they have some bite defensively again?
Yeah, so when you play deep drop like they were, and they still did a little bit of it during the game, depends on the personnel, but when you play deep drop and teams run high ball screens, you have shorter defensive possessions because usually off that first ball screen, they can make a decision, shoot it, pull up. You don't get into as much side to side defense where the ball is reversing multiple times. And you could say, like, okay, that's good for the offense. Coaches say all the time, hey, we want to get the ball from one side to the other. But if you're playing really good defense, and like a lot of the really good defenses in America have really long defensive possessions when you look at like the pace rate. And that's because they're not giving you avenues to crease and get downhill and get into the paint. And then what you're left with is having to try to create out of necessity late clock, or having to shoot a shot late clock that you ideally don't want to shoot. And that's what I think Illinois has done. Not only have they ramped up the pressure, and it's not like they're full denying or pressing 3/4 court, but the pressure's ramped up when you're either switching up or you're stabbing at the ball, or in this case, what I think has helped Kylan a lot and allowed him to put his imprint on the game is just the matchup ownership, like we talked about. I got Danny Wolf. I'm going to make Danny Wolf's life living hell, and he takes a lot of pride in that, and I think it allows everybody else to play off of that defensively and say, hey, well, if I'm Trey White, I got to be really good in gaps, which he really is. That's where he excels. I mean, it's sometimes on the ball. I mean, he forced a turnover with Danny Wolf when he's, slid and leveled him off and Danny threw out of bounds. But Trey's really good as a tagger, as a guy that gets in gaps and, can jump passing lanes. And so I think they're playing to their strengths a bit more that way. And I think it's helped them and give them more confidence, which I've talked about. It's all tied together, defense, offense. And I think it's helped them on the offensive end as well, because you get more runouts and more opportunities for cleaner looks.
3 of 14 from three in the first half, 11 of 23 from three in the second half. Is there anything different between the shots they were taking?
I mean, the quality of the shot is not vastly different from what we've seen, but just when you shoot it with conviction and when you shoot it with purpose, you get more confidence and you see the ball go through the net more often. But also, I mean, I talked about it. Like there was a lot of inside out variety, I thought, and you had Michigan spinning with your 5-out stuff to the point where they had to go zone because they were so afraid of the slips and the cuts with how vacant. I mean, for how poorly Illinois has shot it this year, it still baffles me the way that they're guarded. But I think it's the positioning of where guys are at. You still honor Humrickhouse as a shooter, and you still honor Jake Davis as a shooter. And oftentimes those are the guys in the opposite corner. So you can't have a guy slide all the way over into the paint and just camp out there. So that's where the slips open up. And then once the slips open up, you switch to a zone, and there's going to be more 3-point opportunities out of the zone and more offensive rebounding opportunities out of the zone. So Michigan was chasing their tail all game. And so I do think the defense, and like I said, when you feel like you've overpowered somebody physically, there's just something to that where you step into threes a little bit differently. And I've talked about it. Like the when Illinois checks all those other boxes and makes the threes that they take and take at a high rate, dude, I mean, it's like, to tell me the ceiling. Like it is
the roof. Yeah.
Yeah, it's for real. But you have to do those other things. And I thought because they did those other things, it set them up to have those offensive rebounds, those inside out variety shots. And I've said this before as well, but when anybody practices shooting, right? If you've practiced shooting in your day, I'm sure. I've obviously done it. There's viewers that have done it.
It's very different. I shoot compared to Mike LaTulip, by the way.
Yeah, but my point is, if I'm shooting on the driveway with my dad, or if I'm in the gym on the gun like we have, or you're shooting with your friend, where's that pass typically coming from?
Right.
Underneath the basket. Mm-hmm. In that area. It's not often that you practice with passes going side to side. So when you don't get any paint pressure, you don't get those offensive rebounds, those inside out looks. That's, I think the quality of the percentage of 3-pointers can go down for the 3-pointers that you're taking. But when you get them off offensive rebounds and paint pressure, now you give yourself a chance to make them at a higher rate. I think that's what we saw on Sunday.
What does this version of Kylan Boswell, I would even say the Duke game version, right? Like the last 3 games have been different. What does this version of Kylan Boswell mean for Illinois?
I mean, it means a lot. I think you always want players to be aggressive and be confident, but his aggression and confidence, I think, is different than most guys. Because when he's aggressive and he's confident, he's physically dominating somebody. And that has a ripple effect on your game. But I love the emotion that he played with. I think we lost that a little bit in February. And it's not like, oh, well, he didn't care anymore. It's just when you get a little bit more internal, you get more quiet and you're not as external.
Mentally, he was not into it, right? Like he was just kind of going through one of those mental hurdles right there.
Yeah, and like you could see it during the game when they would get a turnover, how the emotion that he was playing with and the fire that he was showing. I think that permeates to the rest of your team when you're looking for, like, KJ's maybe not as demonstrative, right? I mean, he's just kind of cold-blooded and does his thing, and he'll show emotion every now and then. We saw it in the Iowa game, but you need a guy like Kylan, especially the guy that does the defense stuff, that does the is kind of your point of attack defensively. That usually is the guy that drums that up. And many occasions, again, they force turnovers, just showing fire. He helps over, blocks a shot. He says, "Give me that shit." You can hear it through the mic. I'm sitting on the couch and can hear it, and I'm like, "Hell yeah, man!"
That's for a while.
Yes,
because it's in him, man. And you think I can't help but not think of what it means for March, but also what it can mean for next year to have that guy leading your team. Like I was wondering what Kylan Boswell was going to be in February. This version, man, like that, love that guy on my team.
Yeah, I mean, look, and it doesn't mean if you're the vocal leader of a team and the kind of the emotional leader of a team, that doesn't mean you have to be the best player. That doesn't mean you have to be the go-to guy. I mean, we've seen over the years, Tum Nairn was that for Michigan State. He was a guy that played with fire, but he was certainly, not their number one option. Trey Holloman is that for Michigan State this year. I don't even know if Michigan State has a number one option. It's probably Jace Richardson now, but he plays that role where he's just going to dog you defensively, and if you forget about him offensively, he's going to make you pay. And I think that's where Kylan is at his best. It's when he can have a little deception to his offensive game and get you on cuts and slip to the basket and get and ones, and you forget to box him out. Now he's playing on the offensive glass and getting putbacks. I mean, and same goes for Trey White. So like it is so important because you want guys that you can depend on and trust when it comes March. And it's so even more important when there's a guy that you can stick on the other team's best player. I mean, there's so much value in that because it gives guys confidence in their roles outside of you and around you. And I think that's, there's a domino effect that happens from that.
All right. Trey White missed the Rutgers game due to illness, maybe still coming back against Minnesota from that illness. Plays like 15 seconds and has 2 fouls and doesn't play again.
Yeah.
Then he had 2 DMPs. Like, those are 2 DMPs. He wasn't sick anymore. He had 2 did not plays. And where's this going? Last 3 games, Mike, 16, 14, 19 points, 5 rebounds, 2 rebounds, 11 rebounds against Michigan State and playing pretty strong defense. What's this version of Trey White mean when we didn't know if he was going to be an impact player in March just a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, it's amazing that you were able to salvage it, and credit to Trey White for just staying in the fight. And I thought, I don't know what it was like behind closed doors, but all I can see is just on the broadcast and watching on the bench. But it looked like he had a smile on his face even when he was not playing. And I don't know what it was, to be honest. I mean, part of me feels like it was maybe an overreaction to the second half against Ohio State, where he didn't play. Will got going, and Trey kind of got caught up, I thought, and it's not his fault, right? Like, he got caught up when I think the staff was also in search mode, right? And then you see kind of a glimmer of success in something that's working, and you kind of want to hold on to it and stick to it. And that happened to be without Trey. And so, could have been the illness, could have not been, I don't know, but you're glad to have him back because he makes such an impact in the same ways that I talked about with Kylan. Trey got a lot of his work at Louisville off the bounce and, making plays and trying to create. And I'm not sure that's needed on this team. What's needed is, like, dude, you had 19 and 11 in this game, and it's putbacks and it's cuts and it's getting out in transition. You don't need to run a single play for him.
Mm-hmm.
Not one. And he can make an impact like that. And so those guys who are low usage and can be like almost a 20 and 10 guy on certain nights, super, super valuable, especially when you get to March. And then you see the way he's being guarded, stepping into shots confidently, you're making guys pay. And he's 3 for 4 from 3 in that game. You hope that picks up and is a course correction from the poor shooting that he's had over the last few months. And it's all coming at the right time. And they need that from those two guys, because those two guys can set the tone nightly with those things that you need to bring to every game: the toughness, the defensive rebounding, the offensive rebounding, and just the being assignment sound, because those two guys are probably going to take the two toughest assignments defensively night in and night out.
All right, Mike, Underwood said he seems pretty hopeful that Merez Johnson Jr. will be back for the postseason, which obviously Illinois lacks that piece, right, on their roster right now. Is he the kind of guy that you think can fit in seamlessly whenever he comes back from this fractured wrist?
Yeah, I do. I think, much more than a guy that you have to reintegrate that's really high usage, that has to have the ball in his hands, that now shifts roles back for the other guys. He's a guy that can come in and just be Merez. And we've seen the importance in that. We've seen the value in that. We've seen the trust that Brad Underwood has in him at such a young age. And is it probably going to be off the bench when he comes back? Probably, right? I mean, like, the way you've been going at this point with this lineup, the way Trey's reemerged has been really helpful, because I think Merez's ascension almost kind of coincided with, I think, Trey struggling in a way, and then now you have him back again, and so we'll see whose minutes get impacted from that. I think it's still going to be matchup dependent, game to game, to see. I mean, we just saw, we have anticipated Ben playing 24 minutes in that game with Danny Wolf and Vlad Golden. Probably not, but that's what happened. I thought he did a really admirable job, especially in that second half, knocking down shots, fighting his butt off against Golden. So it's just, Merez is going to have to be. There's probably going to have to be some patience that's exercised, right? It's not going to be coming back and playing 35 minutes a game unless Tommy gets in foul trouble, your front court gets in foul trouble, and you got to ride with him. But, different than a lot of, I think, backup front court pieces, Merez is to have that guy as like, oh, we got to ride with this guy. I mean, that's a guy that's a starter, starting big in this league. So I'll just be curious to see how they do. I mean, I think they really like the lineup that they have, where they go Tommy and can play 5 out, and have Will and Trey and Kylan and KJ, and that seems to be the lineup they want to go with the most. And we'll see what changes when Merez comes back.
The other thing I think of with Merez is like off-ball wrist injury. This guy doesn't shoot it a lot, right, with his offhand, doesn't dribble it a lot, so it feels like it wouldn't impact him as much, right?
No, it wouldn't. It wouldn't at all. I think that's one of those injuries where you're glad it's not a lower body injury, because a big strength of his is his base and the force that he plays with. But yeah, I mean, this is, as long as he's got 3 limbs, I think he's good. And they'll obviously, they won't roll him out there if he's not ready. But When he is ready, we know he's going to come back. We saw it's unfortunate that he got hurt in that Michigan State game because you could see just for how much that fell apart at the end. I mean, he was a really bright spot in that game, I thought. So I'll be excited. Yeah, you talk about next year as well. Can you get him back and get him back in a rhythm, end the year on a high note with a run? And I think that just gives you all the momentum to try to get a lot of this core back to for what would it be, 25, 26?
Mm-hmm. So that's 2 in a row, Mike. Now you host a more vulnerable Purdue team, which we shouldn't look over two in a row. We've only done that twice since mid-January, so feels good for Illinois to do that. Now you host this Purdue team that has lost 4 or 5, did bounce back with a win at home against UCLA, but they've lost 3 in a row on the road. What do you think of this matchup, and what are the keys for Illinois to end this regular season with some momentum?
We've heard me talk about this for weeks now. I really like this matchup for Illinois. I'm interested to see what the spread comes out at. I truly think it's going to be like a 4.5 or 5.5 for Illinois to be favored at home. And but what I'm looking for and why I like the matchup is I think you can put pressure on Braden, just the way that they're guarding him on. That's going to be Kylan Boswell. I mean, there's no question about that. And he's going to be motivated. In front of the home crowd going up against a guy that could be the player of the year. We'll see between him and Tanjay or how it shakes out. But one thing that I'm curious about, just knowing Matt Painter, knowing the way he's just a really good coach. And he's going to want to scheme things up defensively in a way that I think will try to bother Illinois. And I'm watching that Michigan game. If I'm watching what Matt Painter's watching, and we'll talk about it on the film, it's exactly that. It's when they go 5 out and Tommy's up top or Tommy's in the slot, the weak side guy that's guarding the corner guy, they just too many times Michigan, even if it was Trey White, they were outside of the paint, shaded all the way on the weak side to where those slips that Kylan had and those slips that Will had up top, there's nobody in the lane and it's a finish. And I just don't think Purdue's going to make it that easy for you. I think they're going to say, you know what? We are going to plant a guy in the middle of the paint. And if you do throw that ball, you're going to have to meet somebody in the paint. Or ideally, we want to force you to throw that skip pass, get airtime so that we can recover, and then you got to play out of it. I think they're going to switch coverages. I think they're going to force KJ to his left hand. They're going to do whatever they can to keep Trey Kaufman-Renn in drop, to not get him up to the level of the screen where he can get in foul trouble. I think they understand the importance of a guy like him, and they want to keep him on the floor. So just be ready for, switching of coverages. One thing that was interesting was when they played UCLA, and it was kind of viral, and Matt Painter talked about it, but when they played UCLA, UCLA does a lot of kind of bunch sets in the middle of the floor where you have, 3 players kind of playing off each other where, maybe it's a big man going to set a screen and they set that Spain, it's a Spain action where they have the wing come and set the back screen on the big man who's setting the screen's man. So it takes out the drop man and you can maybe get a guy behind him or have your man over help and have the wing shoot up to the top of the key for a 3. I think the more bodies you get involved in the middle of the floor, which is what Illinois has done, you get 3 guys up top, and maybe it's not as much of like Spain actions and maybe those shallow actions they run where it's like you stack Humrikaus and Avicic, and then Humrikaus kind of slips out and Avicic sets the screen, so then it causes confusion on the roll. I think you can do less of that and do more of like, if you're going to have 3 guys, make sure they're up top and wide and spread. Because if you do it so congested, we saw with UCLA, they just triple switch. Like they just keep TKR and drop. And then if you pop a Avicic and shallow somebody else out, then they'll just switch a guard onto a Avicic. I truly believe that. I think they'll have Lawyer or somebody just kind of pop out and make sure you don't get that throwback. And then Trey Kaufman-Renn can still sit back in the paint and not have to engage at all and get into foul trouble. So I'd be ready for that offensively. Be ready for them to have to force skips. And if you do slip from the top of the key, and we've seen it with Will Riley, that kind of 2-man game, be ready to be met by somebody, and that opposite corner is going to be open. And maybe you get opposite corner 1 more for a 3, or you get opposite corner, they have to rotate, swing it back up to the wing, step in threes. So you just got to be ready. You got to be ready for a multitude of coverages against Purdue because they're gonna throw it at you.
Obviously, Purdue's played some tough teams here, but what's changed for them recently, Mike, where the struggles have happened? Because they were on the verge of 5 straight losses. I mean, UCLA was winning at Mackey. That hasn't happened at Purdue since 2014, right? So, like, what's been behind some of their issues here recently?
I think they just needed a reset, much like Illinois in a sense. I think Braden and Trey White more than probably anybody in the Big Ten. Those two are carrying a load that is different than a lot of other teams' top 2 players. I mean, it is high usage for both of those guys. And so I think that took a bit of a toll on them. And that was mixed with Indiana, who showed some pressure and blitzed some ball screens. They played drop a little bit, but they blitzed at times and put 2 guys on. And I thought it kind of flummoxed Braden. He had turnover issues in both those games. I think he had 6 against Indiana and 6 against Michigan State, who also was putting 2 on the ball and rotating and making him, I think, see ghosts in a way, not to go Sam Darnold on you. But then I think being able to have that 4-game losing streak and just kind of reset at home against a good UCLA team who's also going to pressure and try to force turnovers, and you were able to come into that game and I thought, do a really good job of taking care of the ball. I mean, you only had 9 turnovers in the game, and for a team that has switching coverages and blitzes at times. And so I think that'll give them confidence here moving forward. And Trey White was outstanding in that game too. So you can't afford to have Tommy pick up an early foul like he did against Vlad Golden in that game against Michigan. You want to have him on the floor at all times. It's just not a matchup I like. He's better in the low post than I think even like a Vlad Golden. Golden's good slipping out. TKR, same thing. They try to get those short rolls. But you just got to be mindful of those 2, right? Like if you do your job on those 2, the rest kind of ends up taking care of itself. And then like last thing too, Purdue's done such a good job since they've gone bigger of just forcing turnovers. Like they forced turnovers at a much higher rate than I think we've expected with Purdue teams over the years. So check all those boxes, right? You want to beat them on the glass, which I think they're capable of being beat on the glass, but let that margin do its work for you. Don't get 16 offensive rebounds and then have 14 turnovers and only have a +2 margin in that category, right? Can you make that a 10, like an 18 offensive rebound, 8 turnovers, 17 offensive rebounds, 9 turnovers? Like keep that margin, I think, to 7+, and I think you'll like where you're at in this game.
Win this game, Mike, and you're playing yourself off the 8-9 in the Big Ten tournament, and it certainly feels like it would solidify you're not at 8 or 9 in the NCAA tournament, which I think getting a 7 seed or a 6 seed in the Big Ten tournament and setting yourself up to play Michigan or Maryland compared to Michigan State might be a good thing. But obviously in the tournament, I just think there's a big difference between the 1s, the high 2s, and the lower 2s and 3s. So huge game, right? Like a lot on the line, and most importantly, just continue to play good basketball leading into the postseason.
Yeah, we saw the win against Michigan jump them up, I think, off that 8 line to the 7 line. Most bracketologists that I've seen have them on the 7, and I don't think they're done. I think there's enough in front of them to, you get the Purdue win, now you start flirting with the 6. You may be like a high 7, 6. And then you go into the Big Ten tournament, depending on who you end up playing. If that first game is Ohio State, that's a quad 1 game. And then if you win that game and play Michigan again, I mean, you have a chance. I think there's an outside chance at a 5 seed. I really do.
Yeah.
If you can make a run, get to maybe a semifinal in the Big Ten tournament, you'll be in the conversation for the 5 seed. Because once again, what Illinois has done and where their metrics took a hit in that 3-game losing streak was those performance metrics. And when I say performance metrics, I mean the margin of victory. If you're playing a team, how much you beating them by, how much you losing by. And Illinois' performance metrics were really good up until that 3-game losing streak where you lost by 15, by 21, by 43. And so when that leveled back out, that's why you started to slip to that 8 line. And then now you followed up with a 20-point win at home and a 20-point win on the road, which takes those performance metrics back up. When the committee's looking at it, when you look at the quad 1 wins that they have, the quad 2 wins. And then one other thing that I'm looking at is I think USC plays UCLA. And how does USC finish it out? They're last time I checked, their net was 77.
Yeah.
So that's making that loss that you had to them at home a quad 3 loss right now. When I think if they're able to win a game in the Big Ten tournament, that may bump them up past that 75 threshold and give you a quad 2 loss at home instead of a quad 3. So all those things I think are on the table. And I think everything you got to keep in mind too, is there's all these other teams playing too. So all these other teams have a chance to move their seeding and their seed line. And so it's not just about what you do, but you still have to handle your business.
All right, I'm spurring this on you, but I'm starting to think of voting for awards, and I won't have you on, I don't think, before, or it'll probably be when awards are being announced. So Big Ten first team, Tanjay, Braden Smith, Trey Kaufman-Renn. Is Danny Wolf still a no-doubter there?
I don't think he is a no-doubter.
Is Vlad Golden a no-doubter then?
I think Vlad Golden is more of a no-doubter.
Yeah.
I think he probably ends up getting the nod. It's interesting. It's one of the more, I mean, even when I for Field of 68, I did my first and second team All-Americans, Coach of the Year, Player of the Year, Transfer of the Year, and that was hard. I mean, you got like your first. I mean, Janai Broom and Cooper Flagg are really easy. Then after that, you're like, man. And then I started formulating. I'm like, am I just going to put SEC guys? I mean, it's just so it's tough. I think a guy that actually has an outside shot at first team All Big Ten is Derek Queen.
He's on there right now for me.
I think he's been better than Danny Wolf, especially late in the season. Sure. And Maryland has played really well. That would probably be my first team. And this is just off the top of my head, right? It would be Smith. It would be Tanjay, be TKR. It would be Golden and Queen. That'd probably my five at this point.
It's been a rough end of the season for Danny.
Mm-hmm.
I know you and I really love watching, but man, like,
now he's great. I think it's just, again, like people don't realize this wasn't his role at Yale.
Right.
He was not point forward at Yale. So I think you have to keep reminding yourself throughout the season, like, oh man, I'm actually counted on to be a playmaker and go make plays every single game, even when I got dead legs and I'm carrying the load. And so I think he's, there's been a bit of an introduction to that for him this season.
There's no doubt. I think Tom Izzo has this all but wrapped up. Coach of the Year. I mean, what a 5-game stretch. Wins at Illinois, at Michigan, at Maryland. Wins at home over Purdue and Wisconsin. And speaking of all Big Ten, I don't know if I have a Michigan State player on the top 15 in the Big Ten. Like, Jace is maybe playing his way in there. I love Trey Holloman, but like, that's amazing. Like, this is such a team, and it's such an Izzo team.
Yeah, Jace would be all league for me. How important he's been in the second half of the season, and even in the first half of the season, he wasn't getting the opportunity, but he was still super efficient. Yeah. And now just showing the volume to go along with it, I think he'd probably be second team for me. He's been that important to a team that, when we looked at this gauntlet stretch for them, we're like, okay, now is going to be the time, because they, when they started that stretch, they had lost 3 or 4, and you're like, oh man, they're really going to fall off a cliff. And just like I talked about for Illinois early in the podcast. Okay, can you bring the defense and rebounding and toughness every single game? That gives you a chance. That's what Michigan State does every single game. And then the pace that they play with and the strain that they put on your defense, and they play 10 guys, and all 10 guys will score, right? It's been really, really cool to watch, because I think Tom Izzo dug his heels in with, I think when we did our preseason pod, who had the worst offseason? I was like, probably Michigan State.
Yeah.
They were kind of middle of the road last year and didn't really address other needs. Okay, Frankie Fiddler and Zapala, like, are those really going to move the needle? And just like Indiana 2 years ago, where you look at a 9-11 team in conference that returns basically everybody, you're like, okay, well, I don't really see it. And then it takes a freshman like Jalen Hood-Schifino, like Jace Richardson, to just kind of vault you into that next category from just a playmaking standpoint to go along with the toughness in the defense. So, yeah, man, it's been really fun to watch. And I have like my mom texting me. She's like, I just kind of like watching Michigan State. They're just so tough. And yeah. So I'll be curious to see what they do in March too, because you run into a team that matches that type of toughness. If you're not getting the offensive rebounds and you're still missing shots at the rate that they've missed throughout the season, like, could they be a team that falls to a 7 seed, falls to a, if they're not going to get to the 1 seed, but I think 2 is probably their ceiling at this point. They might firmly be on there at this point, but pretty remarkable. And I think, yes, I agree. Tom Izzo, I think, has that award pretty wrapped up at this point.
Which is pretty good given what Greg Gard and Dusty May have done this season for their teams as well. All right, Mike LaTulip, next week we'll talk about the Big Ten tournament. We'll talk about a big game for Illinois against Purdue, and we get to chat about March Madness, man. Looking forward to it. Thanks as always, man.
Appreciate you, dude.